Hi, everybody. I'm Mary, the OG woo-woo therapist, and I want to welcome you back to this week's episode recorded in my functional but versatile home office that is one block from the interstate where traffic noise is a real thing and can be disruptive. So I apologize in advance for any noise disruptions. This week I was asked to speak further about attachment and attachment trauma. So, as usual, because it is possible for some people to use this information to self-help, I have to tell you that everything I talk about today is not intended to take the place of counseling or therapy. It is only for educational purposes. If you relate to any of the information, do not self-diagnose or diagnose anyone else. Seek a professional to talk about it. And I need to give an additional cautionary note that it's important to respect safety through pacing and supporting choice. That means moving slowly, explaining concepts in a grounding way, and as always, you're invited to pause, skip ahead, or come back later. I encourage you to take in the information in chunks. Today, we're diving into something that sits underneath so many of our struggles with relationships, anxiety, disconnection, even shame. The terms attachment wounding and attachment trauma are closely related, but they're not the same. The difference comes mostly down to intensity, repetition, and nervous system impact. Here is a clear way to understand them. Attachment wounding refers to any experience that disrupts a sense of safety, connection, or being emotionally seen in relationships, especially early ones. Attachment trauma is a more intense form of attachment wounding where the relationship that should provide safety is also the source of fear, threat, or overwhelm. Let's clarify something important here. Not all relational pain is trauma. Here is an important nuance. There are not rigid categories. They exist on a continuum. Repeated smaller wounds can accumulate into trauma. What matters most is not the event, but your nervous system response, whether repair was available and whether you felt alone in it. Two people can experience the same situation. One develops wounding, the other trauma. The distinction matters because it changes what kind of healing is needed. The bottom line is that attachment wounding equals you were hurt in connection, where attachment trauma equals connection itself became unsafe. So what is attachment? Attachment is the blueprint your nervous system uses to answer one core question: am I safe with others? This concept comes from the work of John Bowlby, who showed that our early relationships shape how we regulate emotion, experience closeness, and respond in stress. In therapy, we don't just look at what happened. We look at your system and what it learned from what happened. For example, if comfort wasn't consistent, you may have learned to cling or pursue. We call this emotional inconsistency, where it is sometimes warm, sometimes unavailable, not being comforted when distressed, feeling like your emotions too much, and mild but repeated misattunement. If emotions weren't welcomed, you may have learned to shut down. Inconsistency creates insecure attachment patterns like anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. Sensitivity to rejection or distance, people-pleasing, or emotional withdrawal, and core beliefs like I'm not enough or people aren't reliable. Think of attachment wounding as relational injuries. They shape you, but don't always overwhelm your system. These aren't flaws, they're adaptations. So first, let's look at attachment wounding. These can be subtle or intermittent, not always intentional, and sometimes invisible from the outside. Attachment wounding comes from subtle or repeated misattunement, emotional inconsistency, and feeling unseen or too much. This isn't just theory. This is about your nervous system, your relationships, and your sense of self. Attachment wounding feels like I don't feel fully secure, but I can function. Anxiety in relationships, but some stability. And pain when triggered, but not total overwhelm. Attachment wounds don't just live in the past, They show up in real time. You might notice that you have anxiety when someone pulls away, shut down during conflict, people-pleasing, and fear of being too much or not enough. These responses often happen automatically. They're not choices, they're nervous system predictions. Your system is trying to prevent the pain it learned before. Working with attachment wounding is less about fixing symptoms and more about gradually building a felt sense of safety and connection, both with others and inside yourself. Attachment trauma is a more intense form of attachment wounding, where the relationship that should provide safety is also the source of fear, threat, or overwhelm. The experience is chronic overwhelm or fear in relationships, abuse, neglect, or emotional threat, and it is often linked to complex PTSD. A helpful way to think about this is that wounding shapes your patterns where trauma overwhelms your system. But here's the nuance. Repeated wounding can become trauma, and your nervous system, not the event itself, determines the impact. Take a moment and ask yourself, what happens in me when someone gets close? What happens when I feel distance or disconnection? Do I move toward or away? There's no judgment here, just building awareness. My apologies, there must have been somebody walking by the front window. So now let's talk about healing, because this can change. There are therapies for working with attachment wounding. There is emotionally focused therapy, or EFT. EFT helps you understand emotional patterns in relationships. We look at cycles like I pursue when I feel abandoned, I withdraw when I feel overwhelmed. And then we slow that cycle down and create new experiences of connection. There is internal family systems, or IFS. IFS works with different parts of you. Instead of asking what's wrong with me, we ask what part of me is trying to help. This builds internal secure attachment. You become a safe place for yourself. There is schema therapy. Schema therapy focuses on lifelong patterns like abandonment, emotional deprivation, and defectiveness. We don't just challenge thoughts, we offer corrective emotional experiences. Sometimes that means the therapist shows up in ways you've never experienced before. There is somatic experiencing. This approach works with the body. Attachment isn't just cognitive, it's physical. We help your system learn it's safe to stay present in connection. There is mentalization-based therapy. This therapy helps you understand your own and others' inner worlds. Many attachment wounds involve misreading others like they didn't text back, they must not care, or they hate me. We slow that down and build interpretive flexibility. But what actually heals attachment wounding? Here's the truth. Attachment wounds don't heal through insight alone. Healing happens through consistency, emotional attunement, and repair after rupture. It's not about perfection, it's about repair. That's what creates security. Let's think a little about what healing feels like. As healing happens, you may notice that you don't panic as quickly in relationships. You can stay present during conflict. You ask for needs more directly, and you feel more basically okay. The goal isn't to eliminate triggers, it's to change your relationship to the triggers. Now let's talk about attachment trauma. When the system is overwhelmed, which is what I work with in therapy with all my clients who have CPTSD and or dissociative disorders. It typically involves chronic or repeated experiences, emotional, physical, or psychological threat, and no safe caregiver to turn to. Some examples are abuse, emotional, physical, and sexual, severe neglect or abandonment, a caregiver who is frightening, unpredictable or dissociated, and being punished for having needs. It creates nervous system dysregulation, flight, fight, freeze, and fawn. dissociation or shutdown, fragmented sense of self, deep shame and identity disturbance, and often develops into complex PTSD. Attachment trauma is overwhelming to the nervous system, not just painful. Attachment trauma feels like relationships don't feel safe at all. They feel like overwhelm, shut down, or panic when triggered, losing access to your sense of self, and deep, often pre-verbal fear or shame. Attachment-focused therapies are some of the most effective approaches for complex PTSD because they work directly with the relational wounds that lead to trauma, especially early experiences of safety, trust, and connection that shape how your nervous system responds to others. Attachment matters in working with my clients because CPTSD often develops in environments where safety and connection were inconsistent, unsafe, or absent. This impacts emotional regulation, sense of self, trust in relationships, and the ability to feel safe with vulnerability. Attachment therapies focus on repairing these internal working models, not just reducing symptoms. Here's a clear, grounded overview of the main attachment-based therapies for CPTSD and how they help. And you might notice that there's some overlap in treating CPTSD, attachment trauma, and attachment wounding. First, we have attachment-based psychotherapy. The focus is on repairing early relational wounds through the therapist-client relationship. How it works is that the therapist becomes the first safe, consistent attachment figure, and you explore patterns like fear of abandonment, avoidance, or people-pleasing. It is best for deep relational trauma and identity-level shame. This is the foundation that many other therapies build on. There's internal family systems, or IFS, where you focus on healing parts of yourself shaped by trauma. The key idea is that you have protective parts, like the inner critic and dissociation, and wounded parts, which is exiled pain. The way it helps in healing attachment is that it builds an internal secure attachment. Yourself becomes the safe caregiver and reduces shame and inner conflict. It is especially helpful for dissociation, shame-based identity, and emotional overwhelm. There is emotionally focused therapy, or EFT, where the focus is on attachment patterns in relationship. Used often with couples, but it is also individual. It is based on attachment theory developed by John Bowlby. This is how it works. It identifies patterns like pursuer, anxiousness, withdrawer, avoidant, and helps create secure bonding experiences. It is best for relationship-triggered CPTSD and the fear of abandonment or emotional distance. There is somatic experiences where the focus is on nervous system regulation and stored trauma in the body. It was developed by Peter Levine. It has attachment relevance because many attachment wounds are pre-verbal and somatic, and it helps you experience felt safety, not just think about it. It is good for freeze, dissociation, chronic anxiety, or shutdown, and body-based trauma response. There is also didactic development psychotherapy, DDP, where its focus is on healing attachment trauma through safe relational interaction. It was developed by Daniel Hughes and uses the PACE model: playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. It is best for developmental trauma and deep trust and relational wounds. There is schema therapy, where the focus is on lifelong patterns or schemas formed in childhood. It integrates attachment, CBT, and experiential work. The way it works for attachment repair is it uses limited reparenting. The therapist provides corrective emotional experience. It targets schemas like abandonment, defectiveness, shame, and emotional deprivation. And finally, there is mentalization-based therapy, or MBT, where the focus is on understanding your own and others' mental states. It's often used for trauma and relational instability. It helps with misinterpreting others' intentions, emotional reactivity in relationships, and building secure attachment through understanding. For CPTSD, the most effective healing is often integrated or using multiple modalities or therapies simultaneously. For instance, somatic work regulates the nervous system, attachment therapy repairs relational safety, parts work or IFS heals internal fragmentation, and cognitive schema work reframes beliefs. What healing attachment trauma, quote unquote, actually feels like is that over time, you may notice feeling safer, being seen and known, less fear of abandonment or rejection, reduced shame, less I'm bad or I was hurt thinking, restored ability to stay present instead of dissociating, and having more stable, secure relationships. Here is an important reality check. Attachment healing is slow and relational, not a quick fix. Often triggering before it's regulating, and is built through consistency, not insight alone. If a therapy feels intellectual but not felt, it may be missing the attachment component. That's why the relationship with the therapist matters as much as the method. So if you take one thing from today, let it be this: your patterns made sense, and they can change, not through force, but through safe, repeated experiences of connection. Please know that you are not too much. You are not broken. You adapted, and healing is possible. Well, that's it for today. I hope you find this information relevant and useful. If you did, give it a like and subscribe. If you would like to engage in discussion about any of the topics, please look me up on YouTube and engage in the community conversation, or go to my website at https:// all one word and lowercase, theogwoowoo-therapist.org. Thank you for being here, and I'll be back next week with another client-suggested topic. I also will post a list of resources for today's information in the written information about the podcast. Thank you for listening.